Now welcome to another lightning response video. This time we got a question from Ion Plasma who asked, "Hey Thor, I believe that the sequel trilogy will never have the same resurgence of popularity simply because at a fundamental level there are four major things wrong with them." And at this point I will pause and say he's referencing the prequels here and saying how the prequels had a resurgence or have become more beloved as of late, and that isn't going to happen for the sequels. And I'm just going to take each point one by one here and discuss them instead of just reading the whole comment. And his point A is that they are not made by the original creator. And I'm going to have to kind of disagree on this one. And I'm a big George Lucas fan. I'm a George Lucas guy. As a lot of you know, if you watch my videos, I am always deferring to him when it comes to discussing or debating Star Wars, what it is, what it should be, how the Jedi are supposed to be, that sort of thing. I always look to him and his movies first to try to figure out what the whole meaning behind Star Wars is, if you will. Though that said, I have read and seen plenty of other Star Wars at this point that is really, really good and captures the spirit of George Lucas oftentimes. And so, though I would have loved to have seen George Lucas's sequel trilogy, even if it was kind of wacky and off the wall, which he himself has kind of said it would have been, or many fans would have thought it was, as he got into the microbiotic realm, but more of midichlorians and the wills, and that they ride around in people like cars, and they feed on the Force, and they are the Force at the same time. He said plenty of interesting things about what his version of the sequels would have looked like. Anyway, as much as I love George Lucas and wish we could have seen his sequels, I do think there are others that could have done a phenomenal job with the sequels too, that could have done it in a way that tried to honor Lucas, tried to mimic maybe what he would have done, that would have gone to him and talked to him and tried to incorporate his outline that he gave Disney, though it doesn't seem like Disney wanted them to do that. Again, there were some interesting things he was proposing in his sequel trilogy, which I can kind of understand why Disney didn't want to go that route. They had just spent $4 billion on the franchise and probably didn't want to make a sequel the fans didn't like, even though they ended up kind of doing that anyway. But I agree and disagree. Something in the spirit of George Lucas is what they should have done with the sequel trilogy, and they didn't, and thus here we are. All right, next point, point B. The company that made them said blatantly that much of their creative decisions were politically motivated, not narratively driven. And again, trying to be fair here, there's really only one thing that I can think of that they said that calls into question the motivation or the intent behind the sequel trilogy to some degree, and that is Kennedy acknowledging that the decision to make the main protagonist of the trilogy female was very much intentional and very much meant to bring in a more female audience to the franchise, which part of me understands and part of me disagrees with. And I'm not saying I don't want female fans in the franchise. I'm not saying that at all. My wife loves Star Wars. I love my wife. I love that she loves Star Wars, and we enjoy the franchise together. But the problem that seems to have come of that, of having this female protagonist, is you really seem like you wanted to make a point about her. There are many articles, I have showed them before in other videos, about how Rey was going to be the next feminist icon of, well, everything, not just Star Wars. But she was important beyond just being a good character in the franchise, which I understand to a degree, don't get me wrong. I think Luke Skywalker was an important character in the original trilogy, and the messages of the prequels, they were important as well. I'm not saying you can't try to do something important with the story, but it seemed like with Rey there was really an emphasis on trying to make that point where they didn't really necessarily want to show her failing, which is kind of a strange thing when you really think about it. I think what endears us to characters is often them overcoming something, not necessarily being perfect, because none of us can relate to perfection. Nobody on this planet is perfect, and so it's strange to me that they show her not failing very often, if at all, when that again is what makes, say, Luke Skywalker a great character. It's not that he's perfect and always wins every fight and never is defeated. It's that he doesn't give up when he is defeated, or didn't in the original trilogy, at least. Yes, if you count the sequels, he kind of gave up. But my point is, what makes characters good isn't that they're flawless and perfect. Yes, a character that is flawless and perfect sometimes can be fun and enjoyable and good. But in a story like Star Wars, you want to see struggle, you want to see somebody overcoming, you don't just want to see the perfect character win and have no struggles along the way. That's kind of boring, and it's not how real life is at all. So you're not really making a point about anything women are going to face in real life, because let's be real, women, just like men, are going to face struggles and difficulties. So you kind of wanted to show that, and Rey didn't really show that so much. All right, moving on to point C. The story is incohesive at best, not only to itself, but also to the rest of the saga. And this one I agree with pretty much 100%. I mean, the story of the sequels is a mess, as I've said before, as others have said before. It's like two guys kind of fighting over who gets to play with the ball. It started with J.J. Abrams having the ball, and he did what he did with it, and then Rian Johnson took it away and said, no, I'm going to do what I want, and then J.J. Abrams took it back and was like, no, I'm going to keep doing what I originally wanted to do. And so we end up with this really incoherent story. We end up with two guys completely independent and separate visions of what Star Wars could be. One clearly, Rian Johnson clearly, and has said himself he doesn't really like playing in shared universes or playing within sandboxes. Those aren't his exact words. But he has said he doesn't like world building or doing that sort of thing. And he has also said he wanted to just do his own kind of movie, his own story. He didn't really care about what came before or what came after. And so he was possibly the worst choice you could have made in doing a middle movie of a trilogy. And then J.J. Abrams, well, J.J. is J.J. He loves his mystery box. So what makes it even worse is J.J. decides to put all these mysteries into the first movie that the next guy, that Rian Johnson, ignores. And then by the time the third movie comes around, he just has to make up some crazy stuff about Palpatine returning. And here we are with an incoherent mess of a trilogy. All right, on to point D, the final point. The kids who grew up with the sequel trilogy will eventually see past the spectacle and see the massive flaws. As someone who was 10 years old when I saw Revenge of the Sith in the theater, growing up I knew nothing about the background plot of the galactic political situation. I just seen spectacle and not substance. By the time I was old enough to understand the narrative, I also understood the flaws, most of which can be summed up with George Lucas can't write romantic dialogue, but there is still substance and it's still a creative visionary's vision. And this one I also agree with 100%. I mean, when I was a kid, what did I love about Star Wars? I loved the spectacle. I loved the cool stuff. And the reason, I've said it before, the reason why I am still a fan of Star Wars today isn't because I loved the spectacle back then. It's because as time went on, I understood the substance underneath it all. Yes, I would probably still love Star Wars today if I never really understood what was being said or what Lucas was trying to say with all 6 of his movies. But I certainly wouldn't be this much into it still if there wasn't something there to actually chew on and to discuss and debate and talk about besides what is the coolest lightsaber battle, which, yeah, that's fun to talk about too, don't get me wrong. But I love the substance underneath it all. I think there are some very valuable life lessons for younger people. I think there are things in there that older people can certainly look at and go, yeah, that is actually kind of how life works. It is a struggle between my selfish nature and the selfless side of me that wants to be a good person and to help bring about a balance in the world, which I've talked about before, is people being less selfish and more selfless. That's the whole idea of balance in Star Wars. It's not this weird equal parts dark and light. But anyway, the prequels are maybe not the best written movies of all time. I love them. I think they're great movies, and that's in large part because underneath it all, there is a really good story there. There is a story there that will always be relevant about the struggle between how much freedom do we give up for the sake of security. It's a reminder that sometimes those who seem to have really good intentions and like they really want to help you are actually trying to take over the whole galaxy and are Sith Lords in secret. It's also, again, realizing that, yes, you, to a degree, can be selfish. You can want things in life. You can love people. The Jedi are not trying to tell the average person they can't have attachments. They're just trying to remind you, the movies are trying to remind you that the more you refuse to let go of something, the more control you try to have, the more likely you are to lose control and let your emotions run wild and you do some really stupid things. And so, yes, there are things in the OT and the prequels that are important life lessons or messages that will resonate through the ages because they are always going to be relevant no matter what the world becomes. We're always going to have to watch out for bad people. And that question of security versus freedom is always going to be debated, especially here in an age where things like AI and computers are going to get even crazier and you're going to be watched every moment of every day. Everything you do is going to be cataloged and tracked. But anyway, not to get into all that, the sequels, on the other hand, don't really say anything at all. Like, what is the message of the sequel trilogy on the whole? There's really nothing there, nothing we can take away and say, oh, at least there was some sort of important message behind it all that we can take away from it and learn something from. No, there's really nothing like that. I mean, yeah, Rian Johnson in episode 8, he tried to put something in there, I suppose. There is a message or a lesson in there about failure being the greatest teacher, and I don't think that's a bad message to put in a Star Wars movie at all. I just don't know that using Luke Skywalker was the best way to do that. I certainly think Rey being the one who needed to learn that over Luke is makes for a better movie. And so, yeah, in large part, I think these are all reasons why the sequel trilogy will never be as loved as the previous two trilogies. That time isn't going to go by and suddenly 10 more years from now, everybody's going to be a sequel fan, or the kids who grew up with it are suddenly going to be out there passionate about those films. Because I think, like you kind of said, I think they realize they're not that great. They are a mess. There is no consistent vision behind them. There is no real message about them. They don't say anything. They don't do anything. And I think the older the younger fans of the sequels get, and I'm sure there are some of them, the more they're going to realize there's really nothing to latch onto. The same way, like I said, if it wasn't for the fact that there is something behind Star Wars, something to take away from it, I don't know that the spectacle that I loved back in the day as a kid would be enough to really make me a huge Star Wars fan. It's the fact that there's more to it, that there's stuff to discuss, that there are things in there that are important life lessons. And there are some great and interesting characters and coherent stories, and all of that is the reason I'm still a Star Wars fan today. And, well, to be blunt, the sequels lack pretty much all of that. Alright, that is going to be all I got for you this time. Your turn. Take to the comments below and tell me, do you agree or disagree with these 4 points, or do you have other points or other reasons why you think the sequels will not be popular in the future, or do you disagree with that? Do you think someday down the line they will be, and if so, tell me why you believe that. Or you can always ask a question for a future lightning response video. All you got to do is start your comment off with "Hey Thor," you ask your question. I try to answer it in a future video. But whatever you choose to do, leave a comment below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.